taking pictures of nice sunrises or sunsets, but I was never really I never really went to nice places. So I started, or I invested in a new camera, a more serious camera, maybe something that kind of looks like this. And I thought, if I had a better camera, then I could take better photos. So I tried out long exposure photography, and long exposure photography is what inspired me to start taking pictures. So long exposure is taking a picture for a set duration of time. So I set the camera and maybe take a picture for 1 second. So this is like a 1 second exposure, and that's how the water becomes blurry. So I thought if I take long exposure pictures, then I'll take better photos like that. So I thought it was awesome that seeing the water blur just by leaving the camera, taking a picture for a second. So one day I said, I think I want to get more serious about photography. So I went to the cliffs at the Paradise Park, and then I just waited till sunset and just tried experimenting a few things, trying to freeze a capture of a wave. And at that time I was researching about how to improve my photography and using the rule of thirds, like breaking your picture into parts and putting your subject in one of the third cross pairs of the rule of third picture. And then, so I learned about foreground, middle ground, and background. So the foreground is the closest part of the image to the camera. So those rocks in the lower part are the foreground, the water is the middle ground, and the sky could be the background. So I read that if I took a foreground, like included it in my picture, such as these rocks, I thought it would be better pictures if I included a foreground. So I just threw in some rocks, used a lower angle. And this time I thought the photo was pretty good. And then in December, 2013, I went to South Point on a school trip. And also, I thought this one at the time was a good picture too, because it had a foreground, and if you notice, those rocks are making kind of a line towards that little hill. And I thought this was a pretty good photo, but now that I look at it, it was at a nice place, but not really the right time of day. So maybe if I did this during sunset, it might have been a little bit better. So I went to a camping trip to Kona. And for this one, I tried to include an interesting foreground, a long exposure of water flowing from the little trench, and also some clouds. So this was during sunset at a beach in Kona. And this was like the first time I thought this photo was kind of good. I was surprised. And then finally, I got serious about photography. I took my first good photo this is one of my favorite photos I took. I took this in June of 2014. And as you liked it, the foreground, there's like a moss, like a patch of moss, and then a long exposure of water blurring as it receded from those rocks, and also a wave in the middle ground about to crash with the light from the sun shining through the top of the wave. So this is what got me serious about landscape photography. So after this, I started creating a website another thing that got me inspired with photography is night photography. So when I was able to see photos of the Milky Way, I was like, how'd they take pictures of the Milky Way? So I learned about taking long exposures of the night sky, leaving the camera on, taking the picture for about maybe 30 seconds, and this was my attempt on capturing the Milky Way. Also, this was a time I also got another new camera. This is the camera I took it with. And equipment does matter for a certain extent, so I could take good pictures with a basic camera, but all the camera equipment actually does matter for night photos. But you don't need awesome equipment to take good photos. So this was taken last night at 4 a.m. I woke up at 4 a.m. I was waiting to capture the Milky Way for 5 months because during the winter the galactic core wasn't visible in the night sky. So I waited 5 months, and finally last night I was able to see the Milky Way with my naked eye, and my processing workflow changed drastically. So you can see this image. This is the previous image I took in June of 2014 and February of 2015. So as you can see, the bands in the Milky Way, the galactic dust is much more defined. And this was a trip to Raiatea, so I went to the Hilton and stayed there for like 3 nights. And all I did was take pictures of the sunset, so I even missed going out to dinner just to take pictures of the sunset. And for this, I started improving my photography by trying to include an interesting foreground, but unfortunately I still picked just random foregrounds. I was trying to collect as much photos as I could. I was doing like quantity over quality. But this was one of the best photos I had taken from that trip. And I think I was lucky that this was a good photo. And this is the next sunset. And this photo I thought at the time was pretty good, but now that I look at it, I kind of think it's kind of bland because there's not much to the foreground. The sky is pretty nice, but the foreground doesn't have much going on in there. So my views on photography has changed a lot from July 2014 to now. And this is another example of, like, I don't have a clear subject in this photo. If I look at this photo, I don't know if the subject would be the wave or the rocks or the clouds. There's no clear subject to this image, even though it's kind of a nice image. Also, this is another example at the time, in September 2014, I thought this was pretty awesome, like a long exposure, a nice sunset, and then some rocks in the foreground, but those, to me now, it just looks like some scattered rocks, and that's pretty much it. So, I got a new lens for night photography, so this special lens allowed me to take better photos at night. And this is at Saddle Road, taking of Mount Raiatea, and I took this around like 3 a.m. And I've learned new editing techniques to get my images clean. Like, as you can see, this like noise-free. If I took this a couple months before that, I wouldn't have known how to reduce all the noise at night because the camera can't really handle night images. But some special processing by combining multiple images allows me to reduce the noise greatly to make it a clearer image. So in December of 2014, I drastically changed my views on photography. So I was doing a research paper for a college class on composition of photography, and I read a book book called The Composition of Photography, and I actually read this book like a year before that, and that's how I started getting better at photography. But I read this book again and realized I learned a lot about composition. So I started focusing more on a clear subject and using leading lines to guide the viewer throughout the photo. So unfortunately, I actually, for this photo, or the day before, I actually dropped my camera in the water and my new lens. And that was pretty sad, because I was thinking that I would be making a huge wave and I would have to ditch my camera to save my life, but unfortunately I dropped it because I wasn't careful. And this is a photo from January. And this is one of my favorite photos because the clear subject is the water flowing from those lava rocks, and it's creating guiding lines that, as you can see, it goes from the edge like that. It guides the viewer to the main part of the image. So I focused on making a clear subject and using leading lines to guide the viewer's eye. So this is another one from January, and I used the natural formations of the rock, the natural curves, to guide the viewer to the subject, which is the sun. So using the natural guides, or the lines, I was able to guide the viewer to the subject of the sun. And finally, this is one of my most recent